Hello class, sorry I'm not here today, but I do still expect you to do the work just as if I was there. I know I have a new class today, so I want you to go ahead and do the lesson that we're doing, because the lesson that we're doing is actually one of the lowest testing standards from the STAR test. Take a look at your scores, and I'm going to show them to you when I get back. But genetics was the lowest testing category. So I want you guys to go ahead and do the genetics lesson for today, as well as my other classes are going to be doing. Okay? So, all classes, everybody, if you could take out the worksheet that looks like this. I'm just going to give you the instructions for the worksheets. And then when the video is over, it's up to the sub whether they want to go ahead and let you work in groups, in the tables, or you can work alone at the desk. Either way, you must do the work to get credit. So let me go ahead and go over the instructions. Here are the different traits that people have, and I'm going to go over each one with you. Depending on which trait you have, you can either be dominant, represented with an uppercase letter, or you can be recessive, represented with a lowercase letter. So for example, if you are dominant and you can roll your tongue, you would check yes, and the gene you would write big R, because they give you an R here. If you are recessive, for example, if you cannot roll your tongue, then you would check no for little r, and you'd actually put 2 little r's. Because that means, if you're recessive, that means you've got a recessive trait from mom and a recessive trait from dad. So therefore you have 2 little r's, and we know that for sure because you cannot roll your tongue. And rolling tongues is a recessive trait, or a dominant trait. So if you cannot roll your tongue, you have the recessive trait, so you have 2 little r's. Those of you that can roll your tongue, I need you to write at least 1 big R, because we know you got the dominant trait either from mother or father. But it could have been both, but we don't know. Depends on what your mother and father can do. Okay, so you're going to do that for every single one. One more example. If you have a widow's peak, you're dominant, so you're going to write a big P under gene. If you're recessive, you're going to check no, and you're going to write 2 little p's, because that means you got a recessive trait from mom and a recessive trait from dad, therefore you are recessive. If you're dominant, then the dominant trait would have covered up the recessive trait, and the dominant trait would have shown. Okay? So once we've gone through all of the traits, and you've checked yes or no for all of them, and put your genes, as a class, you can tell me how many people are dominant in class, how many people are recessive. How many people are dominant in class, or how many people are recessive. If you're working in groups, you tell me how many people are dominant in your group, how many people are recessive in your group. How many people are dominant in your group, how many people are recessive in your group. So you can see the dominant trait is not always the majority trait. Moving on. So let's go ahead and go over the traits together. So if you can roll your tongue, you're dominant. If you can't roll your tongue, you're recessive. So either check yes for dominant or no for recessive. Widow's peak. If you have a widow's peak, go ahead and check yes for dominant, no for recessive if you do not have widow's peak. Widow's peak is a dominant trait. And if you notice, the majority of people don't have a widow's peak. Earlobes. If your earlobes hang out, they're usually detached, meaning you have a little crevice between your cartilage and your cheek. If you're attached, your ears do not hang out, this is recessive. So if you are detached or unattached, you're dominant, so check dominant. If you are attached, you're recessive, so check recessive. And then your 2 little letters, whatever little letters you are, if you're recessive. Straight little finger. Okay, so you're going to have to make your hand shaped like this. And if your finger goes up and down, your pinky finger is up and down straight, then you're dominant. If you have a curve, some people's fingers curves either to the left or to the right. If your finger curves, then you are recessive. Okay, recessive, you have two little letters, whatever letter they give you. In this case, they give you the letter for each trait. Longer index finger. So your pointer finger is your index finger. So whatever finger you point with, that's your index finger. If it's shorter than your ring finger, then you are recessive. You have the recessive trait. If your index finger is longer than the ring finger, you are dominant. Okay, you have the dominant trait. So if you have the dominant trait, you have the big letter. If you have the recessive trait, you have your gene is the two little letters. If they're exactly the same, just pick one or the other. Okay? It just means you can't tell. But pick one or the other, whether you want to be dominant or recessive, for the sake of the lab. Okay, dark hair, light hair. Okay, this has to be natural. This dyeing your hair does not count. So I probably should have put a different person because I think she dyes her hair. But dark hair, if you have dark hair, you're dominant. If you have light hair, you're recessive. Dimples. When you smile and you have dimples, you're dominant. Check dominant. If you smile and you don't have dimples, check recessive. Right or left-handed. This is what you write with. If you write with your majority in your right hand, you're right-handed. If you write with a majority in your left hand, you're left-handed. I believe right-handed people are dominant. They have the dominant trait. Right eye or left eye. Okay, so for this one, you have to cover your eye, one of your eyes, and whichever eye you can see better out of, that's going to be your more dominant eye. So if you see better out of your right eye, that's your dominant eye, and you have the dominant trait. So you would check yes for dominant. If you see better out of your left eye, then you're going to check no for recessive. Okay? Let me go ahead and go back to the worksheet. So you should have this side filled out and the gene. If you're dominant, you're big letter. If you're recessive, you're two little letters. Okay? Because that means you got one recessive trait from mom and the recessive trait from dad. Okay, then you're going to get together as a group or as a class and count how many people are dominant and recessive in each trait. Now go ahead and take out your second worksheet, and you might need to pause this, but you're going to write the examples for the terminology. Okay, you should have the terminology in your worksheet. So you're going to fill this out. So you might want to pause this and fill out your vocabulary words. Okay, and then when I get back, we're going to fill this out in your notebooks. But go ahead and do it on the worksheet. Allele, if it has allele, it's just a gene. It's a trait. It's a gene on your chromosome. DNA, it's just your DNA. Remember, DNA codes for certain traits like eye color, hair color, protein. Okay? Homozygous. On your worksheet, when you see the word homozygous, it means you have two alleles that are the same. You got the same allele from each parent. So for example, you could have got the dominant trait from dad and the dominant trait from mom, so that this would be homozygous dominant. Or you're recessive. If you're recessive, that means you got the recessive trait from mom and the recessive trait from dad. So you're homozygous recessive, homozygous dominant. Remember, homo means same. Okay, so that's a good way to remember that these traits are exactly the same. Heterozygous is the opposite. So I want you to write these examples. For heterozygous, you're always going to have the dominant and recessive trait. Always have a dominant and recessive trait. And if you're dominant, if you have a dominant trait, then it's going to cover up your recessive trait. So you're not recessive if you're heterozygous. You have the dominant trait shown, like the dark hair or the widow's peak or right-handed, so forth. Okay, dominant, again, is a trait that dominates or covers up the other trait. Okay, and it's represented with the uppercase letter. Recessive trait, we've gone over the recessive traits. Recessive traits are dominated or covered up by the dominant trait, and they're represented by a lowercase letter. But if you have two lowercase letters, that's when the trait is expressed, when you have two lowercase letters. Phenotype, in your worksheet, when they ask for the phenotype, they're asking for the physical appearance. If the worksheet asks for a genotype, then they're asking for the letters. So pay attention to which one they're asking for. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and take out your worksheet, you should already have it out. You should have copied the vocabulary. Next, I'm going to very quickly go over number 1. Number 1 says, in rabbits, black fur is dominant over white fur. Okay, so black is dominant, so our key, our big B, I'm gonna use big B for black fur, little b for white fur. White is the recessive trait. So it says show a cross between a heterozygous black. So as we go back, remember heterozygous means one big, one little. Okay, so that's the male. Okay, and then they're crossed with, this rabbit is crossed with a homozygous white female rabbit. So homozygous white means two little b's. Okay, because we put B for white. Okay, so the parents always go on the outside of the box. The outside of the box is the parents. The inside of the box are the offspring, which are the babies. Okay, and this is just the probability of what the babies can be. So we're going to do our first parent, heterozygous black. So heterozygous means big and little, always. Whatever trait it is, it's always big and little. Homozygous white, in this case, would be homozygous recessive, so it's going to be little b, little b. You're going to want to put the parents first, okay? So you have to read it. Then it's asking for the phenotypic percentage and the genotypic percentage, which I'll go over. So you're going to, in order to make the offspring, you're going to have to drop these b's in. But when you drop the b's in, you want to make sure if there's a big B, you put the big B first, no matter what. Okay, even if the big B was over here. You put the big B first, little b second. So in this case, this would be big B, little b. You drop the b's in. This one would be what? Little b, little b. You drop the little b, drop the little b. Okay? This one would be big B, little b. You drop the big B in, the little b in, but you put the big B first. And last but not least, this one would be little b, little b. Okay, so this is heterozygous, heterozygous, homozygous recessive, homozygous recessive. Okay, start using those vocabulary terms. So if we're asking for the phenotypic percentage, the phenotype is black and white. So there's 2 out of 4 that are white, 2 out of 4 that are black, so half and half. So what percentage is 1/2? 50%. So 50% of the bunnies could be black, and 50% of the bunnies could be white. They have a 50% chance of being white and a 50% chance of being black. But if they ask for the ratio, so if they ask for the ratio, you would put 2 black and 2 white. You just count. So here, if they ask for the genotypic percentage, it would be, again, 50-50. But instead of black and white, it would be 50% heterozygous and 50% homozygous. If they ask for the ratio, it would be the same thing. 2 to 2, but in this case, it would be 2 heterozygous and 2 homozygous recessive. Sometimes it's different, so make sure you pay attention. Okay, so go ahead and complete both worksheets. Those are due by the end of the period. I'll see you guys when I get back.